So, yes, okay, one in the middle, thank you.
Yes, Linda Clarkson from the Dry Stone Walling Association, which is a national charity. I'm here with a colleague from the National Hedge Laying Society also. We've heard an awful lot this morning about agri-tech, and I'd like to make a question and a plea that there are traditional rural skills out there that are really very important. We can't lose those traditional rural skills. We've been chatting this morning about the average age of members of our two organisations. It's a crime that we're getting to over 60 now. We need to bring more people into these traditional rural skills. Please don't forget about us. Please don't forget about us when you're looking at trailblazer apprenticeships and such like. Our traditional rural skills, unfortunately, are people who are self-employed. It's unlikely that we'll be able to get an employer organisation together to be able to put a trailblazer apprenticeship in. Where does the panel feel that these traditional rural skills should sit within the trailblazer organisation, if you like? We need apprenticeships that we can take forward in rural skills. How do we do that?
Can I have very, very brief responses on this, please? Chair, who's going to... Darren?
I would say something we considered much in our principal group of forestry, art, port and landscaping, knowing that there are a number of what I might call niche occupations that are incredibly important, but as you say, do not probably have the capacity to form their own trailblazer group and apprenticeship. So all I can say is a lot of the skills that we've got within our apprenticeship are core skills that everyone needs. You know, first aid, chainsaw, etc., etc. And our view is, and certainly with our own apprentices that we take on, we then expose them to hedge laying and walling within that apprenticeship framework, and if that's what then grabs them, that's what they can go off and do, but they've got the core skills that will enable them to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I mean, something I've been concerned about actually is getting the small and micro businesses viewpoint into the trailblazer sort of structure, because it's driven by levy payers who want to get their money back out of the levy pot. It tends to drive it towards bigger, larger businesses, and we mustn't forget the small and the micro businesses and the self-employed. Absolutely. I haven't got an answer to your question, but what I will do is take that back to the IFA and say, look, how can we make sure that this is addressed? Because I think it's a very good point.
Yeah, and just very briefly, I mean, I think, you know, Sitting Guilds has always been associated with very heritage and craft-based skills as well, so I very much hear what you're saying there. I think there is an issue, and I think it's a well-known issue now within the policy, both at DFE and IFA, that something needs to be done around the apprenticeship reform to actually allow for more of a lever to be pulled so that some of that funding can be utilised, so it works with a broader church of organisations and fills some of those niche skill gaps. I don't think there is an answer yet, but I think it is starting to become a commonly known problem. And in fact, if we look at the T-level areas as we look forward ahead to those, there are many occupations right now that are not covered potentially by the 15 T-level routes. And that again is going to become a growing concern. So I think much more is still needed to make sure that we're not losing out on core occupations as we think ahead.
It's a very timely question. The reason why is we're in the process of considering, as I mentioned earlier, what public good is. To my mind, a real public good is making sure that we have a continuity of traditional crafts, which, while they may be practiced by only a few, if we lose them, will have a terrible impact on the shape and the nature of our country and of rural life in particular. And therefore, I think one of the things that I now have to go away and think about is in the pot of money that we have here in DEFRA, how can I use that and leverage that and work with the National Land-Based College and with the DFE and with whoever else in order to make sure that we don't, at a moment of great opportunity, when we're leaning in and embracing so many great things that can happen in the future, neglect something so critical to our heritage. And I will talk to George and to John Gardner about this particular area, because it is uniquely timely that you mention it now, because it gives me a chance to develop an appropriate strategy in response.
Thank you. And I think what I would say is that there are also, particularly in terms of guiding young people, in terms of information, advice, and so on, many young people are going to make fundamental changes to their careers over their lifespan, and therefore it wouldn't be necessarily in their interests to foster something that was so specific that it didn't have transferability. And I think the important thing is to provide choices at points in their later life. And so that as the Secretary indicated, the idea of being able to specialise in something in your 20s or something when you've studied something like agriculture or countryside or whatever and got a range of skills which are applicable and really made a conscious choice that you want to go into giant stone walling or stone carving or whatever it is, the many areas that City and Guilds covers, then I think that those are right. But I would just guard against narrowing choice too far into a very, very specific specialism.
Can I just add a comment to this question? Because one of the reasons why we fostered a partnership with City and Guilds within the National Land-Based College is because we recognise there are professions within this huge sector, land-based sector, where volumes are low. There are low volumes. And in themselves, they do not represent a commercial opportunity for providers like City and Guilds. What we anticipate and hope is that through the large volume sectors we can subsidise the qualifications for the small volume sectors that are crucially important, as the Secretary of State has said, to the management of the landscape of Britain. Now, conscious time is almost over. Let me just try and conclude, and I'm not going to try and summarise what's been said because there's a lot of really valuable information come out of this session this morning. We have had this issue of productivity dominating and the thread running through the presentations that we've had, and rightly so, for all the reasons that have been mentioned. In my daily speeches at the moment, I'm mentioning this factor of productivity, because here in Britain, at agricultural level, our productivity is 0.8% per annum. In France, it's 1.7, in Germany, it's 1.8, in America, in the States, it's 2%. So we are gradually losing ground in this productivity league table. We used to be rather brash and proud of our professional farming sector and how we could take on the world. Well, I'm sure we can. But we actually have to do better in improving our productivity. And that sort of is part of, as the Secretary of State has said, the reasons why we're talking about skills today. So what we've heard is there are detriments, there are deterrents in terms of young people wishing to come into this sector, partially because it's not seen at school level as being important. We are very fragmented, confusion reigns, we don't work together enough, and we need to collaborate, consult, communicate, as Aaron said. And what we really need is one strategy and one plan. And at the moment, we have lots of strategies and lots of plans. So let me just briefly start at the beginning, because I find it easier to look at the lifetime experiences of individuals. So we started in schools. We talked a lot about schools, and rightly so. And some of you know I've been worked closely with FACE and was responsible for the establishment of the Countryside Classroom Initiative. And we have fantastic experiences that children enjoy when they visit a farm to the countryside. It informs their life. It starts to inform their priorities. And there are 4 reasons, I've said this so many times, why that's important. They need to understand the importance of food and agriculture and the fact that this is an economic activity which largely sustains the countryside that we live in. They also need to understand the environmental impact of the decisions that are taken when they're mothers and they ultimately will fill their shopping baskets. This will have an environmental impact. So they need to understand the environmental footprint of the work we do in the countryside. They also need to understand the impact in terms of climate change and also their health. My goodness, I know there was a time when we need to be influencing children's diets through the better understanding of food, how it's grown and produced and why they need healthy food. It's now. And finally, the issue we're talking about, they need to make career choices. So if by a visit to the countryside, they begin to better understand what happens there. That could influence the choices they make. So we need to do better in bringing more school children out in the countryside. We need to have really bold ambitions, in my view, in terms of what we want to achieve on that. We then got this issue of how do we persuade these school children to choose a career. Now, Brightcrop, I was involved in the launch of Brightcrop, which was an attempt to try and address that. But Jane, how many organisations did you identify trying to do this?
Lee might correct me, but I think we discovered that there was 33 organisations in the land-based sectors that do similar work to Brightcrop in terms of new entrants. So that goes back to my point earlier about we all doing good, important work, but it's very diluted. The impact isn't there because it's very fragmented and a bit fractured. Whereas actually, if we had one organisation that's pulling all that good work together, we could really make an impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So